Voices. This is the first episode in a new series in which we're going to be talking to people who have done things with their lives that other people might find scary. And I'm going to start by telling you a little about why I'm doing this interview with this gentleman. I have been fortunate enough to land in a writers group called the Final Twist Society. And I and my guest, who I'll introduce to you in a second, have both been published in an anthology called We Were Warned, which deals with the subject of taboo. Now, I'd like to tell you about my guest. His name is Leif Behmer. He received his MFA in creative writing at the University of Texas, Pan American, with an emphasis on fantastic literature. His passion for fantasy fiction stems from his exposure to fantasy in both classic fairy tale literature and the fantasy role-playing genre of the video gaming industry. His immediate pursuits include publishing fantasy fiction and in the academy, as well as educating students in composition, literature, and developmental writing. He also spends time as a writing tutor at Houston Community College, spreading his appreciation for written expression to new generations of developing scholars. Leif, welcome to our show.
Thank you. It's nice to be here, Adam.
It is so nice to have you, and it's nice to meet you. We're co-authors in the anthology, and yet we have never met.
Yeah, that's true. You're from the East Coast, and I'm from the great state of Texas.
There you go. You talk about the part of your writer's journey that you were least prepared for.
The writing.
Okay. Tell me.
I still tell my students to this day, as much as experience as I've had in writing, it doesn't feel like it ever comes easily for me. And that's partially because I'm continuing to challenge myself to be a better writer every single time, to make sure I'm not doing the same mistakes, or at least not making them as often as I used to. But when it comes to either writing fiction or writing one of my letters of recommendations to my students, I always have to pause and really concentrate on what it is I really want to say and how I want to communicate that. So I never really feel prepared as much. I'm not really a pantser, as it were. I mean, or a planner, as it were. I have an idea of the feelings that I want to communicate. Planning ahead doesn't always help me in getting the emotional aspect that I want my readers to feel. So I still feel like um, the my writing process is still very difficult for me to anticipate and handle. And so what I have learned is that just not to be afraid of not knowing. Just go ahead, sit down, and it's okay if it's not perfect. Let it be. The writing, especially in my case, I surprise myself sometimes in my writing sessions where I just let myself go and let it happen, and then something will be there, and then that will carry over into the next section. This is going to be a cycle. This is going to be a revision process, and then that usually calms me and allows me to move forward and for the magic to take hold.
Would you say that this is the scariest thing about writing for you, or is there something scarier?
Not knowing, not really knowing if my intention is coming across as clear as I think it does. It still surprises me how scary it can be to share my work with other people and see how they're reacting to it. And being in teaching writing process in my classrooms, I still see my kids coming at me with the same fears. They're very scared and timid. They don't want anybody to know. They don't want their names on their writing project. I like, that's okay. We can keep it anonymous. Just know that I am holding other people accountable for their comments. Okay. This isn't just about you. This is practice in all of us learning to be better communicators.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's very important, especially if you are in a group like we are, where we critique one another. And I have to watch myself before I can get kind of snarky and persnickety, and I have to be very careful because when someone does that to me, it really hurts. So no, but none of us are made of steel. We're all made of glass,
Or porcelain.
porcelain. Better word. Better word. Well, what do you find your students need most?
Confidence. I've
And
got there's a lot of talent out there, lots and lots of talent, and they don't recognize themselves. They don't give themselves enough credit. There are students who they recognize that they have a talent, but they're holding themselves too high of a standard. Like they're already thinking, like they know that I'm a professional writer. I share my writing successes with my students. I hope to be, some source of inspiration to them to make them think about what they could be doing in a year, a couple years, or by the end of my class. But they'll sometimes want me to judge or critique them as professionals. They desperately want that to get to that level. And when it's sometimes hard for them to hear that, okay, well, I haven't been pushing you to that kind of a level. That takes some years, oftentimes, to really get. You're talking about being good enough to submit for like a television series or something like that. Keep this into perspective. So, helping them gain that perspective of where we're at right now in these developmental stages. They don't like to think of themselves as developing writers or developmental writers because, from their perspective, they're taking the most advanced class that's possibly offered. How could I still be developmental? Are you getting a paycheck right now?
even if you
You're
are,
still
I'm still developmental for sure.
Absolutely. I told them that about myself. And you don't want to stop developing. Do not want to stop. Even if you're
No.
already in the prime time and you're publishing a book or two books a year, you never want to get stale. You always want to learn how to increase your repertoire, keep your readership coming back. You never want to stop growing.
There you go. Well, now a lot of people, probably more people write than publish. I'm curious to know, how did you get started writing?
Well, in high school, I was in the creative writing club, and I knew that I had a love of literature very early, ever since I was in the developmental reading courses, actually during my elementary and junior high years. Taking those extra reading classes helped me get a more personal connection with the material that I was had, and it started to, at an earlier age, I started thinking more about stories and storytelling from a more creative aspect rather than just an assignment that I had to have ready and prepared for class. And having that opportunity to read for myself what I wanted and to get that pleasure reading is something that's kind of kept growing and building with me all the way since that beginning.
Yep.
So I felt like I was still keeping up with my interest in the way that storytelling was told in so many different ways. And then let's put that into practice. I kept my imagination kept extending well beyond the end of these classic stories and tales. And I kept reimagining how the story could turn in different ways if certain
Mhm.
things would happen differently. So I just found myself really participating more and more in these what if scenarios, and helped me to better appreciate what kind of stories I felt like I had stories I kind of wanted to tell that I would tell myself, and it just became a fun, casual, a hobby of mine to do that. But I took classes in storytelling, and more I was like, I would just want to take more literature classes. I took four college level literature classes and a philosophy class in the same semester.
Is this in high
And
school or in college now?
this is in college. This is in
Okay.
college. I was about sophomore in college, so I knew that it was very important to me, and I wanted so much exposure to different literature to see how writing could work. And I still remember my counselor when she saw my schedule, and she was like, "Are you sure you want to do this?" I
It's a
was like,
lot of reading.
"That's exactly what she said." I was like, "Yeah, it was a problem. Is there a problem?" It's like, I mean, if you don't think there's a problem, then I guess okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because I
Hmm.
didn't know what was there. So I was always excited to see what my professors had planned for me to read. And then, I just kind of expanded outside of class if I wanted to learn more or do more.
Wait a
Um,
minute. A great reader like you, even in college, you didn't know what you wanted to read by that point. Can you explain this to me?
well, I had my favorite genres. I mean, I loved fairy tales, but I didn't want to kind of pigeonhole myself into one different kind of way of
Mhm.
storytelling.
Oh, I see.
So I
So
was
reading
very
for you reading for you was very important in terms of your development as a writer. So you were very conscious of this.
Yes, yes, absolutely. As I was continuing to experiment with my writing, I kept getting the comments. I was in creative writing classes, and I was getting comments like, "Wow, this is very creative in terms of structure," but it also felt kind of not formulaic, but like too rigid in the way that it's doing things. The way I was experimenting with it was not really accomplishing anything that made people go, "Oh, neat." It was kind of like I was treating it like an exercise,
Hmm.
is
When,
kind of what started happening. And so the
yeah, yeah.
passion, the feeling of it, the point of the work and the poem weren't really amounting to anything especially interesting.
That is interesting. I think I share that with you. To some extent, I felt like when I was writing in the early days, I was basically problem solving. Like, I think I want to solve this problem in this piece of work. And when people read it, of course, they didn't have the same joy I did that I'd solved the problem. They wanted something else. It took me a long time to figure out, what people want when they read.
I wrote a poem that also worked as an acrostic.
Oh, you and I are buddies here, man. I did the same thing. I've met my soulmate. This is amazing. Yes, yes.
In class this happens, and everyone's reading through the poem, and they're getting the rhyme scheme, and they're at the end of it, it's like, what exactly is going on here? And I just kind of, I'm not allowed to talk in the critique session, so everyone's trying to figure out the poem, and they're getting this and that from it. And then at the very end, I get the last words. Anything you'd like to tell us? It's like, okay, everybody, look at the very first letter of every line all the way down. As soon as they did that, they all went, unbelievable. Only you. Oh,
That's great. No, I like those kind of puzzles too. I really do. It's interesting to meet someone else who's done that because for me that is a lot of fun, especially if they don't notice. Like it's a good poem, but there's a secret message in it. Like, I'm sorry, I get a kick out of that. So, fantasy. You like fantasy. When did you start reading that?
um, that was I was attracted to dragons
Mm-hmm.
in my developmental courses in mythology. My brothers and I were interested in role-playing games, tabletop role-playing games. We were playing Palladium and Dungeons and Dragons, and that was some of the first fantasy reading I did wasn't fiction. It was fantasy non-fiction. It was an instruction manual
Oh, like the
that
Dungeons
in
Master's Guide.
right. And it
Right.
was including backstory from all these different mythological components. And a lot of it was medieval animal husbandry and things. So you're creating a character in a class. You have to fully immerse yourself in that role. You got to know something about it. So that was kind of my first exposure into understanding like fantasy realms and worlds and things like that. But but yeah, there's that alongside with the Lord of the Rings, which was a big series in my family. My grandfather got it wasn't like a nice hardbound republishing of the Lord of the Rings for my dad in the 70s, and that's kind of been like the family copy. And so ever so often, we'd pull out the books and we'd enjoy them together, and then we'd watch the animated film of the
Rankin and
I think it's
Bass.
a Rankin and Bass animated
Mm-hmm.
film that came out. And so that was the film, and those books are probably the first like real fiction encounter that I got for that, because that was part of the accelerated reading program when I was in
Oh,
grade school. It was on the list, and I'd seen the film a
in
hundred
grade
million
school,
times.
Lord of the
Yeah,
Rings. That's pretty
yes,
advanced. I had a
yes,
hard
it
time with
was.
that
It
book.
was worth a lot of points.
Yeah, sure.
If you got all those questions right on that quiz, boom, you got a lot of points, and you could cash those points in for some nice prizes,
Yeah,
nice plastic toys,
they really wanted
and
readers. That's amazing.
yes.
Yeah.
And there was a quiz for like each book,
Oh
because
gosh.
each book is like so big. And so I did it for the Fellowship of the Rings one semester, and
Yeah.
I was like, hey, there's you know, so that was sort of my opening to the high fantasy genre, and still so many different subgenres that I wasn't even aware of. You could even kind of consider superheroes as
Yes.
a superhero fantasy is its own, genre distinct from that. So those are some of my most earliest exposures, alongside some more modern fable stories. Like I think Charlotte's Web was
Mhm.
one of the first books that I read, without it being like an assignment or anything like that. I just decided, you know what? I'd seen the animated film as part of our Laserdisc collection in my family. We'd see that all the time. It's like, well, I want to see the book now. I want to see the adaptation of different literature that I saw in film. Was also a gateway into my personal, relationship with reading.
Mhm. Do any of these fantasy books have something in common, a through line for you?
As the magic aesthetic, the supernatural aesthetic, when done well, usually will um, surprise me in the in its metaphorical or symbolic significance that's not readily accessible at the moment, but the impact is still there. So while I'm trying to solve the puzzle, I can tell the pieces are there and the impact is moving, but they're not simplistic. They're rich. I find a lot of richness in those sorts of stories.
So you like fantasy with a lot of backstory, with a lot of Tolkien, of course, is the king of this. There's just backstory to the backstory to the backstory. It's freakish. You just never see the other side of the scenery.
Mhm.
There's other books like that that I suppose you enjoy. So for you, it really is immersion in a world.
Yes, yes, absolutely. If I feel immersed in the world, it helps me pretend like I could be somebody there in that world, like I'm somebody who's actually observing some of these events, or I could be somebody, a side character. Maybe I'd like to join the party, as it
Yeah,
were.
right.
Um,
No pun intended.
mhm.
Yeah. So let's talk briefly about your own story for the We Were Warned anthology called Taboo. What is this story about?
Okay, so this is a story that I've been sitting on for some time, along with a number. As a teacher, it gets difficult for me to concentrate a lot of time on my work. So I sit on a story and mull over it a lot until the story itself is like, write me, or you're never going to get any sleep. Right. So, so Taboo has been a work that I've been um, wanting to put together for some time now. In fact, our previous anthology with music as our muse contains a narrative poem that is written from one of my characters in this short story,
Oh,
Franklin. He's a bard, and he writes a vampire poem chronicling the his emotional journey through a vampire attack. And so this story, Taboo, is about the two girls who are his friends who find out that he's being attacked by a vampire, and what they can do to try and save his life.
okay. Did you want to read a portion of it for us?
Absolutely. So I think this part is perhaps one of the most dramatic moments where we're featuring the taboo of children arriving late to school.
Okay.
It's not done at all. But Taboo and her sister, so Taboo is late for school. She has just found out Franklin's secret at the water fountain, that he's got a couple of bite marks. He doesn't tell her, and she can't bring herself to raise it in the conversation. So he's singing his tune, and she gets the subtle messages within that tune, and she realizes this might be his last performance. So she decides to run to school to see if she can get help.
Okay.
So this is the beginning of that scene. The pink glimmer of morning had fully transformed into the white of day by the time Taboo arrived at the schoolhouse steps. She had never been so late, yet her legs did not hesitate. She charged up 2 steps astride, then grabbed the handles of the door, ready to fling them open. The schoolmaster would meet her with shouting before she walked the plank into the deep end of the classroom to receive her paddling at the desk, as she did with Mr. Pierce. The other children would stare with glee, but Taboo didn't care. She would tackle Mr. Ichabod if she had to, but she would get exactly what she wanted to learn from her teacher. Taboo anticipated that the sudden crash of the doors against the pine wood wall would capture everyone's attention, but all eyes were upon Jinx, standing at her desk. Are you saying I killed them? Jinx cried. She addressed Mr. Ichabod, who stared at her dumbfounded, holding a piece of chalk against the blackboard. One of the boys finally answered, Duh, he just said slugs can't breathe underwater. Jinx blubbered and pointed at the schoolmaster indignantly. Yesterday, Mr. I, you said slugs, snails, and frogs all thrive in damp environments. Why is water safe for snails but not slugs? Child, the schoolmaster began, it's simply the way they're born. Some snails have gills to breathe. Some land snails can hold their breath for extended periods. However, slugs never learned how to breathe underwater. Jinx stammered. Then I did kill them. I tried to save the slugs, but I killed them. I didn't mean to. She crumbled in her seat, still wailing in despair. The other students muttered comments they thought she couldn't hear. The schoolmaster raised a palm to his head. Jesus Christ, child, they're just slugs. Samuel Hendrickson timidly raised his hand. Yes, what is it? Excuse me, sir, but you shouldn't take his name in vain. Mr. Ichabod glowered at Samuel, but said nothing. Then he noticed Taboo, still standing in the doorway. Ugh, don't just stand there, child. Shut the doors and take a seat. Taboo nearly obeyed. She still had a chance to pretend things were normal. Things might get back to normal if she just let it be. The schoolmaster addressed her sister's tantrum. Control yourself, child. Take this news as a learning opportunity. Now you know better. You'll be more effective at saving slugs in the future. All right, we'll leave the amphibian discourse aside and focus on a true life-saving technique. Take out your notes on the circulatory system. I'm going to explain what a blood transfusion is and how it's used in our medical care. Listen carefully, children. This is going to get quite complicated. Mr. Ichabod, I have an emergency. I need your help immediately. The schoolmaster faced Taboo, who stood perfectly still in the center aisle. He squinted and thought, perhaps trying to determine if she was being honest. What kind of emergency? Vampire, she said. That single word hung in the rafters, threatening to swoop down and attack. Chairs scraped against the wood panel flooring. The younger school children looked at the older ones and took convulsive breaths, except for Jinx, who hid beneath her desk. They all quickly shuffled out, led by Sam and Luke Henriksen. Mr. Ichabod didn't stop them. It was useless. Once the schoolmaster was alone, but for Taboo and Jinx, he curled his finger at Taboo, summoning her to his desk. His eyes locked onto her pallid face, and he pursed his lips. All right, young lady, let's have it. And pray this is no prank.
Thank you very much. That's a lot of fun. I can't wait to read the whole story.
I hope it's fun.
It sounds like it. So for those people in our audience who are authors or who are writers but want to be authors, who haven't taken the leap yet, what do you want to tell them?
Do it. You want to if it's at the least bit of interest to you, you can take the time to put that passion into practice. If you worst thing that happens is you don't, and then you're always wondering what if, having those regrets. Do not want to have those regrets. um I'm actually reminded, one of my favorite books of all time is Peter Beagle's The Last Unicorn.
It's a beautiful book.
Yes, in that story, I was raised on the film first, right?
Hmm. Pretty cool film
And
too.
then
Yeah.
uh-huh I got to so I read the book later and had a much more profound appreciation for the messages that were still present in the film, but not as fully explored in the book. But Schmendrick the magician, I'd come to learn, is as inept as he is with magic because he can't fully realize or appreciate his full potential.
Hmm.
He's actually immortalized in the book by his teacher until he gets to that place where he can fully appreciate his abilities. Then is when he actually becomes a mortal man anymore. So he's actually quite old in the film. And that resonates with me some, that you want to uh, because the value of giving yourself the time that it takes to fully realize and appreciate your talents and exercise those talents is so worth it. Schmendrick doesn't want to have a life that's wasted. That's the vanity that his mentor was trying to help him avoid, was going through life having never realized his actual potential. And so that to me is what makes me appreciate being a part of this writers group and continuing to exercise my passion. I don't want to just be pulling out a short story or a poem or two a year. I need to be doing a lot more to get myself as recognized as I would like to be eventually. So keep that passion in mind. The process is usually not quick, but you having that feeling of knowing that you've made progress, you've done something different than that year before, it's made such a world of difference for me.
Leif Behmer, thank you so much for being my guest today. I really enjoyed talking to you.
Me too. Thank you so much for having me on, Adam.
It's our pleasure. And friends, if you're looking for a community of people who do scary things, please join our Facebook group, Away with Our Fears. Feel free to visit me at acol.net to find out more about ways to do scary things and people to do them with. We look forward to seeing you. And if you'd like to be part of our show, be on our show, or if you know someone who might be a good fit for our show, please feel free to contact me. Until then, we'll see you next time.